Lord Reinenklam, everybody here, I'm very grateful to be here. My voice is shot. I used to live in Boulder County up in Jamestown. At the same time, David Hyde lived in our twin sister of Ward and taught at Front Range Community College, which is about 70 miles to the west. Suzanne's shaking her head, part of our great community college system here in Colorado. And my best friend picked me up at the airport. We bought a bottle of single malt scotch and we crawled into most of it and talked till about 2 in the morning to get caught up. So my throat's a little out, but hopefully I'll still be able to project and hopefully get through what is a lot of words about not so much the books, which is what we've heard from so far, but what's in the books. So a little bit of history of my relationship with PKD. In the late 80s, I was at San Francisco State, where our host David Gill teaches, and he and I get endless amounts of fun talking about what it was like there when in the 80s when I was undergrad. But I was a philosophy major. I like books about ideas. I like movies like Blade Runner, and heard the name Philip Dick floating around, but couldn't find, the books weren't readily available. I don't know what was in print. But there was a fanzine, really a nice music magazine and literature magazine called Forced Exposure, put out by Byron Coley and Jimmy Johnson out of Boston. I bought every issue, and they covered William S. Burroughs, J.G. Ballard, and they printed a letter that Phil Dick had written about the owl in daylight in '82 or so, and it was the first time it was published through, I think, a deal with Paul Williams. And I read it and went, my God, this is so strange and weird, and who's this name? And oh, he wrote Blade Runner. And anyway, it kind of got on the back burner for a while, but about a year later, I got a mailer, the junk mail, from the Quality Paperback Book Club. And if you're of a certain age, you'll remember these book clubs. They would say, tape a penny here. And you would literally tape a penny to a card and you'd tick off the record, Blue Oyster Cult and all these. And then suddenly you get 10 records, and then they send you every month a record, and it costs twice what it would cost in a record store. So it's kind of a scam. But there it was. The book of the month from the Book of the Month Club was the first omnibus publication of the Valis trilogy. So I thought, wow, that's kind of I don't even know who Phil Dick is, but it's kind of a Phil Dickian thing where I'm looking for Phil Dick, and I get more or less sent the opportunity to get it for a penny. So this is not that copy. I have that copy at home under glass, of course, well thumbed and dog-eared and taped back together. And this is my backup, but I brought it for trades, maybe later if we do that at the bookstore. But I sat down and read it, and it did what most of us experience when we read maybe our first Philip Dick, is it just blew my mind. And I became on the journey that we go on. You go to the used bookstores and you look through and you find the novels and you read them. Some stick with you more than others. The ones that have stuck with me the most are really these late period works. So this article is coming out soon in a book, and it's called something like Reason and Revelation or Reason and something else, Jesuit science fiction, Jesuit fiction, edited by my friend Richard Feist, who I think some of you may know. And I've been on a couple panels with Richard. That's how I met David several years ago. So he's doing this anthology, and he asked me if there's something I wanted to write about. And I said, well, I don't know anything about Jesuits really, except for the relationship between Teilhard de Chardin and Phil later in his life. So that's really what the article or the book chapter is about, but I've taken all that out to focus mostly on these 3 concepts in Phil's late work, which is Gnosis, which most of us are familiar with. We see logos a lot, but maybe don't quite understand what it meant to Phil. And then Aletheia. It's Greek, so you pronounce every vowel, and it's associated with the Greek philosopher Martin Heidegger, and it means the unconcealment. So in his late period here, I think Phil was really working his way through these very heavy themes. So that's what today's going to be about. Some of my other publications on Phil, there's a lot of these blankety blank and philosophy type books. So I'm in the Man in the High Castle one. I'm in the Blade Runner 2049, which is mostly about the role of the police officer in science fiction. And then a book that I did about 4 or 5 years ago with my good buddy Christopher Turner is a book on the philosophy of the great German filmmaker Werner Herzog. And it's kind of weird it happened this way, but this one article I'll be discussing today is about Phil's religion in the last part of his life. There's another one coming out who, and I think some people are in this. Is Gabe McKee here? Yeah. There he is. Hi. It's wonderful to see you.
And you too.
Yeah, good. Gabe's been flowing me lots of PDFs lately. Yeah. But we are both in this book, which is being edited by a couple fellas whose names I cannot remember. One is Michael.
And George C.
Right. And it's on, I think, Roman and Littlefield. And it's the esoteric, here we go. The esoteric theology of Philip K. Dick. And that one is on the description in the title, Death and the Divine in the 60s, mostly three stigmata, or what is the LSD astronauts, right? And Counterclock World, which nobody writes about, so I did because I like it. And finally, another book, and it's blanking me on what it is. But anyway, this stuff's all going to be coming out. And if you want any of this stuff, you'll have my email at the end. Write to me, and I'll send you PDFs in the spirit of Gabe McKee. So, here's a quote that Phil uses that I want to use as a framing device for this talk. And it's from John, not the John, from the epistles of John. And we don't really know who this John is. It's not John from the Gospels. It's a different John. The Johannine epistles. So here's the quote that Phil writes about a lot, especially in this period of his life. My dear people, we are already the children of God, but what we are to be in the future has not yet been revealed. So there's that word. All we know is that when it is revealed, we shall be like him because we shall see him as he really is. So Phil really works us into several books and a lot in the exegesis. And it fits in with the theme of things being revealed or unconcealed, Aletheia. So, as I've already said, the late works are under the influence, obviously, of the pink beam, 2374. So I look at the exegesis and the novels and letters and interviews. And what I try to do with this is I tried to stick to the, as if there's any Philip Dick nonfiction. I tried to stick to the nonfiction contemporaneously with the fiction. And the other article on the 60s, I stick to it as close as I can as a sort of a research structure. Meaning, if you're going to start talking about what Dick says about what happened in the 60s and the late 70s, you're sunk. There's too much there. But if you look at the letters and other nonfiction from the 60s while he's writing Three Stigmata, LSD Astronauts, and Uick, that's the other book, and Counterclock, you start to put together a few pieces. And that's something I think I've tried to do since 90 when I bought the Valis trilogy, is really trying to understand the thinking. I mean, they're fun books, they're weird, they're interesting, but there's a lot of thinking behind it. And as a philosopher of law and philosopher of ethics, etc., that really interests me, especially thinking about things like ethics. This is about religion, but it ties in. So here's kind of the general idea without reading it too much by trying to look at Dick's own attempts to realize what 2374 means. I draw together his explorations of rationality, so we could think of the logos as rationality, knowledge as gnosis, and aletheia or unconcealment, to create what, in Dick's own words, a Christian Neoplatonist conception of reality and truth, which resulted from the invasion of his mind from what he describes as, in the Platt interview from Dreammaker, I think in '81, a transcendentally rational mind, as if I had been insane all my life, and suddenly I'd become sane. Many people would say the opposite happened in 2374, but this is Dick's own words. Through gnosis and knowledge that the logos of reason is revealed or unconcealed. So that's kind of the mantra throughout the talk. Gnosis is indispensable for salvation because it provides knowledge of the bad world created by the lesser deity, the demiurge. And this knowledge allows the unconcealment of logos, or the good world of spirit created by the true God. Very uplifting. So the darkness maybe of the Gnostic era really begins to change quite a bit in the later novels themselves and the exegesis. So here's the argument, if you want to lay it out. I know it's a little dry, but I'm a philosopher. Premise 1, true God and his universe is logos, rationality, reason, and truth. Premise 2, the logos is concealed by the material world created by the lesser deity. Premise 3, gnosis is the knowledge of the truth of premise number 2. And then conclusion 1, gnosis, knowledge of the truth of premise 2, leads to the unconcealment of logos and eventually salvation. So Peak Beam made Dick see God and reality combined and progressing through stages of evolution by means of a dialectic between good and evil. Speaking through Phil Dick, the narrator of Valis, they also revealed that the universe might be irrational. This is such a great line from Valis. But something rational had broken into it. This something rational, of course, is God as, I think for Dick, living being and for concept as well. So it's through gnosis and knowledge that the logos of reason is unconcealed. It's indispensable because it provides us knowledge. And again, it leads us to the good world of spirit created by the true God. Along the way, there's a bunch of death. And this is something that both of these articles really look at, maybe biographically. You think of the last page, the author's afterward from Scanner. This is for everyone who died or went crazy from drugs. And it's, what, 15 or 20 people. And then you look at these novels that I'm looking at here, there's death and suicide throughout them. So Dick attempts what you might call a Gnostic theodicy. And if you study any theology, theodicy is the attempt to explain the evil of the world and human suffering in light of a supposedly omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent God. If you're a virulent atheist, like I was at one point in my life, and you'd say, why does God allow so much death and human suffering and the Holocaust? And believers, well, he's just testing us. Well, he gave us free will and we fucked it up. There's all these different, that's all theodicy. That's all engaging with this contradiction between human suffering and evil and the omnipotent God. So was this part of what you might call his religious turn? So some people say that he got religion later in his career, primarily due to the pink beams. I think that's really uninformed. He's been religious throughout his life. They imply that somehow he might have lacked it earlier and maybe produced better writing. Some people don't like the end period Philip Dick. Writes some guy called Gabriel McKee. Biographical evidence from those who knew Dick depict a devout, if open-minded Episcopalian, a firm believer in Christian theology and the authority of the canonical Christian sculptures. Citation omitted. In 70, Gillespie says Dick demonstrates his quest as religious. For McKee, the quest was God, and specifically the Christian God. And finally, McKee, and I agree with Gabe, religion plays an important role in all of his work. So, there's one of the big problems, and something David Gill and I have been kind of chatting with recently. Are there any contemporaneous writings from 2374? Now, if you've got your copy of the letters or a nice PDF of the letters, you know that the letters in February and March say nothing about what we know about 2374. Remarkably, they're mundane, they're angry, they're just pure letters to publishers, reviews of galleys, whatever it was. But there's nothing that says, OMFG, beaming at my brain. Nothing. No reports about conversion, the fish, or anything else. No written memoranda that are contemporaneous with the events that constitute this. So letters include receipt of the Xerox missives on March 18th and 20th, letters to the FBI, and high blood pressure. He was hospitalized. And for the simple reason he began it after 2374, there's nothing contemporaneous in the exegesis about 2374. So first indication is a letter, I forget who it's to, February 1. And this is something David and I talked about just recently. I think he shared it on the blog. There's a letter on that date. All I can recall about January is I had the wisdom teeth pulled and he's on Darvon or whatever the big opioid is. For 2 weeks I thought it was the same. I was truly out of it. So this is maybe the first indication that something is going to be happening out of the ordinary. He writes in his other letters detailed lifestyle and habitual changes due to these events. Most are really banal. Oh, I lost weight. right? Oh, I no longer drink beer, I drink scotch, or whatever all these things are in the letters. There you go. Where are the pink beams? Most interesting is his stipulation that mostly what I get is a lot of information and the Logos doctrine. At first I thought it to be a typical religious conversion. This is later. Mostly because I thought about God all the time, wore a consecrated cross, and read the Bible. So this is exegesis excerpts. Later. The transmissions gave him, quote, a classical education, all very sane and steady, supplying him with the most worthy, the highest virtues, and all this. We know all this. He first does it, from what I could tell, and I want to premise this. I just dabble in this. You guys are the experts. And you guys who have access to unpublished letters, let's talk. Because all I've got is what everybody else has got. And once again, there's nothing about pink beam here. First time he does it is April 14th, so beyond, if however tight we want to make 2374, to Ursula Le Guin. And he says, the Holy Spirit's taken me over. This is very kind of tongue-in-cheek, turning against the communists, like our Roman rulers. To me, on the basis of my recent religious experience, I feel we're in Rome. So here's really the first mention that I'm aware of. I'd love to update it if you're aware of something earlier. In another letter, I think a month or so later, he says, I underwent a religious conversion. In another April letter, he says, I had a religious experience of deep meaning. When? I don't know. In June, to poor old Peter Fitting, Dick begins to fill in the details, the vibrant artworks, you know, and this is something, if you've ever eaten a big handful of mushrooms or LSD, you know, these things are very familiar, the Clay and Kandinsky type artworks. You also just press on your, you know, closed eyelids and see stuff like that. Eating all the vitamin C, which was really popular back in the 70s, right? It cured cancer along with apricot pits or something. He's getting printed out information. It's his first record that's information from sidereal, I don't know how you pronounce that word, sidereal space, was being beamed in. Huh? Sidereal? Yeah, sidereal. Okay. Hey, take it outside. Dick was convinced the Holy Spirit was directing him. He writes to Claudia in June, and he gives the date of March 18th for the experience of the non-objective graphics and the written information mentioned in the letter to Fitting. It's also the date he gets one of the Xerox missives, which I think we're fairly certain about those dates, but he says several months later, oh, March 18th is when it happened. Unreliable. Golden Fish has become obviously the most iconic, mentions it the first time in September to his good friend Ursula. Sutton dates it on February 20th. If everybody's got the footnote to the February 20th, I'd love to see it because it's not in Sutton's book. It just says, oh, it happened February 20th. Okay. In a February 16th letter to Bush, so much later, he's been positive since April that his entire experience was triggered off the dark-haired stranger who came to the door. So several months later does this wonderful, just iconic image. And I always think of Robert Crumb's illustration of this with a typical R. Crumb female and Dick staring at the golden fish. During the Paul Williams interviews later that year in Rolling Stone and then Only Apparently Real, Dick says that 2374 constituted an experience of integration and discovery of another world that came about because, bing, 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 the golden fish. So why no mention of religious conversion or golden fish till later? So Paul Williams really just has this wonderful, just tender and understanding explanation that he offers up. And he says, and he had interviewed Phil about this, that Dick was apprehensive about sharing these experiences. So this is the early 70s, probably the least popular, what's the right word? You're at the cocktail party and everyone's chatting and you say, oh, I had a religious conversion last month. And people are probably going to move away and go somewhere else. So maybe, according to Williams, this is what Phil was doing. So Paul writes, Dick talked to me about them in a cautious way when the tape recorder was off. I had difficulty understanding what he was telling me or what it was that had happened that was so important to him. As a result, he failed to recognize at the time of the interviews that he had experienced a total shift in the nature of his relationship to the universe. He says it was ambiguous because Dick was nervous about sharing his metaphysical experiences anyway, which, as we all know, may not be true. Phil seemed to be more than ready to share these types of things. And that Dick was shaken when his editor for Valley System A, eventually published as RFA, commented that Dick had gone religious on us. So there may be some psychological reasoning about why this is not something that he had, was writing down in the letter. He knew religious topics and personal accounts of religious or mystical experiences would be anathema for many readers. All right. I was a Christian, but had to hide it, or they'd get me. Sounds very Phil. Becoming a Christian in 100 AD or 1974 was for Dick a wrong turn. While he may have been a Christian for at least part of his life, he's heavily influenced by the beliefs of the various sects present during the formation of Christianity known as the Gnostics. So here we go to Dick on Gnosis and knowledge. So most of us know the idea behind the Gnostic theology. And you can sum it up again. I mentioned it a little bit earlier. The Gnostic idea would be, look around, the world sucks, death and destruction. There may be a God who made the ultimate universe, but he didn't make this world. And so that was very attractive to Phil. This is an insane God who is a faulty craftsman, a demiurge, and his creatures suffer just like manufactured physical objects because we're made by this demiurge. We suffer, we die. Gnostics do not deny the existence of a true benevolent God nor the promise of eternal life. But this God, and Jung writes about this a lot, is a deus absconditus, the hidden, concealed, secret, or unknown God. So the knowledge of the true God is a knowledge or knowing promised by Gnosticism. When you understand that the world is an illusory, pale copy of reality, the truth of the logos that lies behind it can then be unconcealed or revealed. So again, continuing theme of this. Gnosis, in this sense, constitutes salvation from death. And this is where I think Dick, a major part of what Dick does through his writing is look for salvation from death. And it's Gnosis that was beamed into Dick's brain as external info during 2374. And my other chapter looks basically at ideas on death from Lucretius, the great Epicurean. When you're dead, it can't be bad because you're gone. And for things to be bad, you have to have sensory apparatus to sense badness or goodness. If you're dead, you don't have it. So that's very comforting on the one hand. And then Dick is also reading 1 Corinthians with St. Paul's exhortation, you will live again when the trumpet blows. So poor Phil, and this is all over Counterclock World, which is not part of this. But that's poor Phil just reading this stuff going, oh, good, when you die, it's over. But wait! And again, I think the impetus of this comes up from maybe this preoccupation with death. Oh, these ended up being really tiny. Gnosticism, this is a quote, so I didn't write this, emphasizes the preeminence of individual experience of the divine over mere belief in dogmas about the divine passed down. It's a struggle to penetrate behind the world of appearances to a great spiritual reality. And that's J. Kinney. So I think that's from the intro to that first collection from the exegesis, In Search of Valis. It confirms there's a fundamental error present in creation, and this earth is a God-forsaken place. So Gnostists cleaved to this oral tradition of revelation, which allowed a degree of mythological imagination in these traditions that exceeded the rational speculations of even the most metaphysically inclined of the philosophers. So he's aware of this kind of problem. And so when you read Dick, right, oh, the real world is underneath. Well, how do you know that's real? Right? This is like it's turtles, man, all the way down. You just keep peeling back the layer. And so, oh, I've discovered reality. Oh, but now I got to keep going and keep going. It's an endless regress. So if the apparent world is not real, how do you know the next one is? So he says, it really does not make sense to say the universe is irreal unless you have something real to compare it with. Hence, the correct formulation is not irreal, which begs the question, but epiphenomenal, rests on top of the phenomena, epi above. Whereupon you look behind or beyond the epiphenomenon, the things that happen on top of other things, to see what its Urgrund, or primal basis of reality is. So Dick says the epiphenomenal is real insofar as it partakes of God and only insofar as it does. Aware of Gnostic darkness well before Pink Beam, he found himself moving away from the darkness of the irrational view after 2374 and towards a new conception of a rational benign God and universe, which he credited to the doctrine of the Logos. So we see it a lot, especially in this stage. So he quickly sees a connection between Pink Beam and Logos. Letter to Bush in the summer of 74. I've had lots of religious mystical experiences which concern the Logos. Another letter to Bush, his experience of the graphics. He looked back in Flow My Tears and saw the Logos embodied in the single word Felix, or happiness in Latin. Prior to this, he regarded the Logos as being purely Greek based on the Heraclitean fragment, which we'll look at the end. This, as we will see, changes to a Christian doctrine because of 2374. So Logos, and there it is in the ancient Greek, had different meanings for different cultures, eras. For the Greeks, it could mean, and here's the beauty of Greek, words, saying, statement, speech, discourse, conversation, language, story, account, thought, reason, measure, proportion. According to Heidegger, who pops up here twice, the Logos of Heraclitus, who had a lot of influence on Phil, has been interpreted as, and then here's your Heidegger for you, which either is a pink beam of itself into your brain and you get it, or you wonder what, WTF he's talking about. Ratio as verbum, as cosmic law, as the logical, as necessity and thought, as meaning and as reason. Wow, again and again, a call. It's a part of Heidegger, is the calling, and that the universe calls out to you as a being. The calling, a very important word. Again and again, a call rings out for a reason to be the standard for deeds and omissions. That makes sense. Yet what can reason do when, along with the irrational and the anti-rational, all on the same level, it perseveres in the same neglect, forgetting, another big part of Heidegger, to meditate on the essential origin of reason and to let itself into its advent or its beginning. For Christians, it may refer to a divine being or to the divine aspects of reason or rationality, to a type of universal power, or to other aspects of the divine. Above all, it refers to the rational order of things. Earlier theologians had thought the Logos as mediating between the inaccessible simplicity of God the Father and the multiplicity of the world, the sacred and the profane, if you will. They had invoked the Logos as the subject of the theophanies of the Old Testament and as incarnate in Jesus Christ. And this is Edward Luth, I believe his name is. He's a theologian. And here he is again. Logos is a power that works unerringly towards the good, for which reason the world created by the Logos is good too. And this is where I think Dick ends up in this last period of his life. For Christians, Christ is believed to be the Logos made flesh, where Jesus and the Logos are one and the same. So RFA features a lot of explicitly logocentric ideas. Nicholas Brady obviously is the experiencer, the person who experiences 2374, and it's pretty finely grained autobiographical detail, if autobiographical is really the correct word here. It's the first time he fictionalizes or semi-fictionalizes or totally fictionalizes 2374. His metaphysical experience closely tracked Dick's own, as Nick, the character, represents Dick, the writer, in a mostly critical dialogue with, quote, Phil. So the identity hopping that we see in Valis is obviously really already kind of laid out in it's not really a draft, it's a whole new novel. But writing as Nick, Dick reveals that in response to the initial contacts with whatever it was contacting him, Nick viewed the world not as I customarily view it, but from the eyes of a dedicated Christian. It was a different world entirely. That could be Dick writing in the exegesis. Phil, in a more supportive role, tells Nick there's a slight chance that he's being informed by the Holy Spirit, which is a manifestation of God. Later, Nick expresses a theory that Dick has often entertained about 2374. The transmissions were from an alien life form, this is all familiar to us, that had appeared to the ancients as God, whereby the fall of man represented a falling away from contact with this vast communication network and from the AI unit expressing itself as the voice of God. Originally, we had been integrated into this network and had been expressions of its identity and will operating through us. Something had gone wrong, the lights had gone out on Earth. In a roughly contemporaneous entry in the exegesis, Phil reveals that he's come to recognize that Logos and Christ are the same thing, indicating his acceptance of Christian belief that Christ is the Logos in the flesh. Like that graphic? You know, these pop up when you're doing PowerPoints. Like, all right, this one works. Boing. Later in Valis, Dix writes that Horstlever Fat was seeing and hearing words, pictures, figures of people, printed pages. In short, God and God's message, or as Fat liked to call it, the Logos. For Fat, the Logos was delivered by God or someone who owned a long-range, very tight information-rich beam of energy focused on Fat's head. Dick/Fat remained in touch with a good God whose Logos was rational while he confronts the Gnostic belief in an irrational universe created by an irrational demiurge. And that's what I think Phil is going through too. So the Logos represents the opposite of the history of an irrational universe described by Gnostic texts. So we're starting to see what I think is a shift here in Phil's thinking, from Gnosticism to what we call Neoplatonic Christianity. If, Dick reasons, the Logos was rational and the Logos equaled God, then God had to be rational as well. Because, he continues to reason, the Logos is God, then to experience Christ is to experience God. Again, he quotes that verse from the first epistle of John for the idea that we can be like him because we shall see him as he really is, and claims that this may be the most important statement in the New Testament. We shall be like him. Dick Fat suggests that his encounters with God constitute a fulfillment of the promise of that passage, wherein man and the true God are identical as the Logos and the true God are, but he's suddenly faced again with that Gnostic stipulation that a lunatic blind God created a screwed up world filled with death and pain and suffering. So although the universe is as a result the irrational creation of an irrational mind, the true God lies above all, and he is not irrational. He has, Dick writes, arrived to help us, and we know him as the Logos, or living information. And in other places, he continues to explain his moving away from the Gnostic to the logocentric point of view. The information revealed that both Dick and the universe were sane, rational, and real, and that's very important as well. From what I saw and understood from 374 on, there's a total plan, the Logos, which superimposes as a vast, static, complete blueprint pattern over a space-time continuum universe, the one we experience empirically, the one our senses tell us about. And it's good, right? God created the world and said it was good, and Phil seems to believe that at this point. Although deeply religious, and I put Christian in the scare quotes, Dick was also a 20th century rationalist who sought explanations for both worldly and mental phenomena that were not dependent on religious mysticism, Kierkegaardian leaps of faith, or passive acceptance of the mysteries of existence. For him, religious phenomena are as explainable as physical phenomena. So when we go to the Catholic Mass, right, I proclaim the mystery of faith. I think Dick might say, it's not a mystery. We can explain it. It's rational. God does not work in mysterious ways. God, as Logos, reveals to complex beings and systems due to their own complex brain functions. And again, Desjardins is very much similar to this, if you've ever read him. And Dick only comes to him much later, but they're tracking each other's thinking here quite a bit. Dick in the Platt interview, the history of the universe is a movement from irrationality, chaos, cruelty, blindness, pointlessness to a rational structure, which is harmonious, interlinked in a way which is orderly and beautiful. Striking things for Philip Dick to be saying. In another move away from Gnostic pessimism, he begins to appreciate the beauty of existence. Unless one posits a basically benign force behind the universe, Dick says it's really easy to get into areas of malevolence. And we've seen him go there. that we don't realize that at one time we posited to start with a benign super entity, right? God. And then assumed his plan from that, deduced the plan from his presence, and now we start seeing a plan. Dick admits he used to believe the universe was hostile. I was misplaced in it. I was different. But this year I realized that's not true. Imagine realizing that yourself. Wow, this world sucks. I get divorced for the third time. I got a shitty job. And then you wake up one day and you go, it's all a beautiful thing, right? Everything is beautiful in its own way, like that song from the 70s. Well, it sounds like Phil at this point. As a result, he felt a tremendous faith that 2374 was helping me rather than screwing me up. It was watching very carefully to see what needs I had and doing everything I could to fulfill them. Considering the meaning, he concludes a vast, active, living intelligence system. It's very much what Heraclitus taught and would probably have called it valus logos. This understanding of logos is tightly connected to Dick's belief that 2374 allowed its unconcealment or revelation. Accidentally, the word revelation got a little hidden behind the big yellow exclamation point. I thought it looked really neat. Here's Lethem. Is Jonathan here? Hi, I've never met you. I'm Blake. Here's you up here. And Patricia Jackson. The exegesis is an act of human survival in the face of a life-altering crisis, both intellectual and emotional, the crisis of, and here we are, this theme of revelation. No matter how resistant we may find ourselves to this ancient and unfashionable notion, sounds like Phil, to approach the exegesis from any angle at all, a reader must first accept that its subject is revelation, and I'd add it's soteriological, meaning it's focused on not just revelation, but salvation as well. So in a 75 March letter to Claudia, he writes that on March 20th, so here we are again picking dates, we're pink beams. March 20th, Vallis freed him to see the world was a cardboard, a fake, a Potemkin universe, as it were. We all know the movie, the Battleship Potemkin by Eisenstein, and I'm hopefully not condescending to anybody or insulting anybody, but a Potemkin village, the Russians would build up these fake villages like movie sets where it's just the front and bring in visitors and say, see all the new housing we built? But we call that a Potemkin village. So a Potemkin universe would be a cardboard or a fake. And Potemkin was just some Russian general or something. So 2374 emerges as a large-scale unconcealment of the true universe. The Greek term Aletheia is indelibly associated with Martin Heidegger, who writes that Aletheia refers to truth and reality, Atheia, emphasizing the role of the a private, which is the comma before the a, I believe. I'm not a Greek scholar. Where in Heidegger's interpretation, truth is the absence of forgetting or oblivion. And there's similar themes in Plato. Or more germanely, the absence of concealment and therefore unconcealment. So moving over to Transmigration of Timothy Archer. My favorite Phil book. It's the third that I read out of this collected volume. It's the one I return to and read in an afternoon. It's his most feeling book. It's his best female character he's ever done, but it's just him. You know, Angel is Phil. And it's heartfelt, and it's really trying to come to terms with the deaths of several people that Phil was very close to. Science fictional elements, 0, I think 0. Anyway, TTA, I'll point to the Heraclitus fragment, which Dick was really interested in, and so was Heidegger. And the quote of the fragment 123 is roughly the essence of things, right? What things really are deep inside. They're Ding an sich, as Kant would say, likes to hide. So the essence likes to hide. And that's about, 300 BC from Heraclitus? Or rising out of self-concealing bestows favor upon self-concealing. There's Heidegger putting in too many words. And then Dick specifically mentions the fragment. And in the exegesis, or maybe in Vallis, I forget, it's translated as the nature of things is in the habit of concealing itself in the context of Paul's conversion experience on the road to Damascus as a precursor to Dick's own pink beam encounters, fictionalized as those of horse liver fat in Vallis. St. Paul writes, Dick writes that St. Paul had the similar experience a long time ago. He refused to talk about it. According to his own statement, much of the information was fired at his head, right between his eyes on the famous trip to Damascus. And it died with him. Chaos reigns, but St. Paul knew who he had talked to. And then in another letter to Bush, he says, in July, last night I woke up with an acute feeling of resentment and the scales falling from my eyes and my illusions shot to hell. So there may be a little religious self-aggrandizement here by trying to direct analogy between you and St. Paul, but that's Phil for you. Similarly, Tim Archer is a fictionalized version of the ever kind of chimerical and quixotic Jim Pike, who was Dick's friend and controversial Episcopalian bishop. The Tim Archer character is bent on finding wisdom and that which is concealed beneath the artificial veneer of the apparent world. Archer's journey reflects the dangerous allure of Plato and Kant, both of whom argue there's another world or a reality beyond the apparent one. For Plato, it's the rationally accessible world of the forms, and for Kant, again, it's the absolutely inaccessible Ding an sich, or the thing in itself. For Archer, the forms and the Ding an sich were accessible only through the act of dying. And obvious suicide on the one hand, and the naive death of the searcher with no hope of reaching their destination on the other. And this is Tim Archer / Jim Pike's death out in the desert in Israel. Heidegger appears to paraphrase this type of feeling. This one's even more impenetrable than the other one, and I'm getting tight on time. I will skip it. For Dick, the unconcealing brought about by 2374 was a benign one that promoted mental and physical healing in me that had been present but not visible to me. As a result, God is then seen as a higher sentient order, with world as blind lower order, which the higher can overrule, to which man can aspire. So conclusions, from Gnostic theodicy to Christian Platonism. I view these works, especially Timothy Archer, as extended theodicy. They constitute his attempt to solve the problem of evil and the overriding presence of pain and the inexplicable shadow of suicide. Each death in Archer is self-caused and based on the real events of his friends, Pike, Marin, stepmother of third or fourth wife Nancy, and the character of Kirsten from Archer committed suicide, and Pike's son shot himself in the face while on LSD. Likewise, many of the deaths in Valis are suicides. Gloria jumps out of a window. Even the little child god Sophia dies in an accident. A lot of death in these books. Fat's friend Kevin repeatedly asked, what about my dead cat? On Judgment Day, Kevin planned on displaying the dead cat, stiff as a frying pan, to God to ask, how do you explain this? Classic sort of dismemberment of theodicy, of explaining how there could possibly be a God in the face of a dead cat. In DI, Rami is dying of multiple sclerosis, discussing God with Herb Asher. Her hair is falling out. She's in pain. Asher thinks, I don't know how someone whose hair is falling out can believe in God. Ribis eventually dies in a car crash. There's also the same sort of scene in Valis, where he visits a friend dying of cancer. She's bald and suffering. These are very touching moments in these books. She believed God was healing her, and a rosary was laid out on the stand. In my opinion, Dick writes, a big fuck you God would have been appropriate. The rosary was not. So in that situation, it's this what I'm calling a dismemberment of trying to explain God's presence in the world. A real God wouldn't allow this. Addressing the same questions posed by any attempt at theodicy, Dick asks, why would God let anyone choose death, much less allow innocence to die accidentally? The standard answer is that God gives us free will, and this possibility is there when Angel tells Barefoot, the Alan Watts type guy in Timothy Archer, I let them die, especially Tim. Barefoot says Tim could not have avoided death. He went to Israel in order to die. That's what he wanted. Death is what he was looking for. But if free will is a gift from God, why would God grant such a gift, knowing that so many people would abuse it by killing themselves? Several other examples where Dick encounters these problems of evil, many of which are explained or explainable by the the Gnostic understanding that we live in an imperfect world characterized by sickness and death. So as a result, Gnosticism, I think, is attractive on a certain level, right? It explains away the problem of evil by asserting the God of creation, Yaldabaoth, who is consequently responsible for evil and suffering, is not the true God. Understanding our Gnosis that the true God isn't responsible for this allows you to solve the problem of evil by uncovering or concealing the logos, the rational universe that lies behind it. So evil, pain, and death are neatly explained by the cosmological structure, which reveals an error in creation's abode. I think Dick found great therapeutic and liberatory value in the idea that God created the world, but not the God. You want proof? We could imagine Dick's answer. Look around, we see only evil, mystery, and Kevin's dead cat. This can only be the handiwork of a lesser God. So again, from my perspective, Dick was like Desjardins, a 20th century rationalist, steeped in the laws of physics and science and the Aristotelian rules of cause and effect that determine the sum total of possibilities in the physical universe. Against his better judgment and in the face of the ineffable, meaning that which cannot be denied based on your own sensory and empirical experience, he became convinced not only of God's existence, but also the Logos of Christ as the world made flesh. And here's Gabe again. The God Dick believed in was the Christian God, and it was Christianity to which his theories ultimately returned. So I'm getting low on time. I'm going to move through it real quick. So he ultimately rejects Gnosticism. And we mostly, I think most of us, we read Phil Dick, oh, he's the Gnostic science fiction writer. He rejects it very clearly. In 78, he arrives at his own words, a Christian Platonism, and determines the Gnostics are absolutely wrong. In believing in the Holy Spirit, or Logos, breaks into the rational universe. He comes to accept the irrationality of all these things as part of the benign and loving universe. All the properties we ascribe to God lead us to the Father and the Logos that subsists from out of him, not Dick's words. So his experience confirmed this ultimate affirmation both of Christ's divinity and the ultimately rational nature of the universe. Thank you. Go ahead.